Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're taking a look at something pretty critical. It's this sort of invisible battle happening inside us all the time.
Right. We're talking about the respiratory system. It's basically the main gateway for infections.
And the numbers are just staggering, aren't they? Our sources say something like 10,000 microbes inhaled every single day.
10,000, yeah. It's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it. And it's not just the exposure.
No, the conditions inside, they're almost perfect for these pathogens, right? Warm, damp.
Exactly. Warm, moist, lots of surface area. It's prime real estate for microbes looking to set up shop.
So our mission today, our deep dive, is really to break down this airborne arms race, as you put it.
That's the idea. We'll look at the different types, bacterial, viral, fungal, and see how they try to get past our defenses and how our body fights back.
Okay, let's start with the battlefield itself, the respiratory system. We usually split it, right? Upper and lower.
Correct. You've got the upper respiratory system, so nose, pharynx, all those associated bits.
And then the lower system.
That's the larynx, trachea, the bronchial tree, and down into the lungs themselves.
Structurally, the first line of defense is that mucosal lining, the epithelium.
Right. It's a physical barrier. But the real star player, functionally speaking, has to be the ciliary escalator.
Okay, explain that. How should we picture it?
Imagine tiny, tiny hairs, cilia lining the airways. They're constantly beating upwards in this coordinated wave.
Like a little conveyor belt.
Exactly like that. They catch mucus, trap microbes, debris, whatever, and sweep it all upwards.
Up towards the pharynx.
Yep, up to the pharynx. From there, it's either swallowed and stomach acid deals with it, or coughed out, expelled. It's a self-cleaning mechanism.
But crucially, it can be damaged. Things like smoking.
Oh, definitely. Smoking is a big one. Chemicals paralyze the cilia, or even some viral infections can knock it out of action temporarily.
And if that conveyor belt stops?
Then the microbes don't get clear. They get deeper into the lungs, cause more problems.
Okay, so for an outside microbe, an exogenous one, to actually cause an infection, what needs to happen? Our sources list some criteria.
Yeah, there's sort of an invasion checklist.
Yep.
4 key things.
First.
You need enough of the microbe, a sufficient dose. Can't just be 1 or 2 usually.
Okay, dose. What else?
It has to be airborne, usually in droplets of particles. And importantly, it has to stay viable, stay alive while it's traveling through the air.
Right. And the last step, the really crucial one.
It has to land on the right spot. Find susceptible tissue it can actually attach to and start multiplying, start colonizing. If it fails any of those steps,
The infection fizzles out.
pretty much, yeah, it gets stopped.
But it's not just invaders from outside, is it? We have our own microbes living in, say, the upper respiratory tract, normal flora.
Absolutely. Things like Staphylococcus species, S. mitis, they live up there normally. And they actually help us, competing with potential pathogens for space and resources.
That competition is protective.
It is. But here's the catch. The sources really emphasize this. They can turn on us, become opportunistic pathogens.
How does that happen?
Well, if your immune system is weakened, or if that protective mucosal lining gets damaged maybe by a virus like we mentioned.
Ah, okay. So the virus damages the lining, and then the bacteria already living there see an opening.
Exactly. They seize the opportunity and cause what we call a secondary bacterial infection, which can be quite serious.
Right. That leads us nicely into the bacterial threats. The classic sore throat bug, strep throat. Group A, Streptococcus.
Yep, Streptococcus pyogenes. That's strep throat or streptococcal pharyngitis. Very common, especially in kids age 5 to 15.
It spreads easily.
Person to person. Nasal secretions, saliva. You see it more in late fall, winter, early spring.
And the key thing here clinically is treatment, right? Antibiotics are a must.
Absolutely crucial. Not just to feel better faster or stop spreading it, but to prevent some really dangerous complications down the line.
Let's talk about those. First up, scarlet fever. That's caused by the strep bacteria too.
It is, but specifically by strains that produce a certain toxin, an exotoxin.
And that toxin causes the specific symptoms.
Correct. You get that characteristic fine red rash, often starts on the chest, neck, and the really telltale sign, the strawberry tongue, bright red, bumpy.
Wow. Okay, that's one complication. What's the other major one?
Rheumatic fever. This one is much scarier, though thankfully rarer now, with prompt antibiotic use.
How does it work?
It's an autoimmune reaction. It happens maybe, say, 18 to 20 days after the strep throat seems to be gone. The body's immune system mistakenly attacks its own tissues.
Attacks what specifically?
Joints, causing significant pain.
Yeah.
But the biggest worry is the heart. It can cause permanent damage to the heart valves, really serious long-term consequences.
So treating strep throat quickly is vital.
Mhm.
Okay, moving deeper into the lungs again, Streptococcus pneumonia, pneumococcus.
Right. Gram-positive bacteria, often seen in pairs Diplococcus.
Yeah.
And its main weapon is structural.
It's a weapon?
Its capsule, it has this thick, sort of slimy outer layer.
And that helps it how?
That capsule makes it really hard for our immune cells, specifically the alveolar macrophages deep in the lungs, to grab onto it and engulf it, phagocytosis. It resists being eaten.
So it can just multiply freely down there, leading to pneumonia.
Exactly. Or it can even get into the bloodstream and cause infections elsewhere. But the really big concern now is resistance.
Ah, DRSP, drug-resistant Streptococcus pneumonia.
Yeah. This is a huge public health issue, largely driven by, well, overuse and misuse of antibiotics.
And certain groups are more at risk.
Definitely. These sources point to the elderly, very young children, people with weakened immune systems, and anyone in crowded settings like nursing homes or daycare.
Is there anything we can do preventatively?
Yes, thankfully. Vaccination is key here. There are conjugate and polysaccharide vaccines available that target the most common capsule types. Really important protection.
Okay. Now, what about some of the less typical bacteria, mycoplasmal pneumonia, sometimes called walking pneumonia?
Right, caused by Mycoplasma pneumonia. Often milder, more common in younger adults, under 40. But it has a unique feature that's critical for treatment.
What's that?
It doesn't have a cell wall. It just naturally lacks a cell wall.
And why is that so important?
Because many of our go-to antibiotics, like penicillin and other beta-lactams, work by targeting the bacterial cell wall. They disrupt its synthesis.
So if there's no cell wall,
Those antibiotics are completely useless against mycoplasma. You have to use different classes of drugs like macrolides, knowing that structural detail is essential.
fascinating. Okay, then there's the really big one, tuberculosis, TB, caused by Mycobacterium tuberculosis.
And acid-fast bacillus. And the sources highlight this concerning resurgence that started back around 1985.
Why did TB start increasing again after declining for so long?
It was a combination of factors hitting at once, a perfect storm, really. The HIV/AIDS epidemic was a huge driver, creating a large population of immunocompromised people highly susceptible to TB.
Okay, that makes sense. What else?
Increased immigration from countries where TB is much more common. And crucially, problems with treatment completion here.
People not finishing their full course of antibiotics.
Exactly, which not only fails to cure them, but actively breeds drug resistance. This is how we get MDR-TB, multidrug-resistant TB.
Which is incredibly difficult to treat.
A nightmare. Requires cocktails of second-line drugs, often for a year or even longer, with more side effects. Prevention is key. Screen populations with the PPD skin test, especially high-risk groups, treating latent infections and isolating active cases promptly.
Right, so bacteria are a major challenge, often requiring specific antibiotic strategies. But viruses, they're responsible for the sheer volume of infections, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely. The stats are something like 90% of upper respiratory infections and maybe half of lower ones are viral. They just dominate.
Like the common cold, not just one virus.
Nope. Over 200 different viruses can cause cold symptoms. Rhinoviruses, adenoviruses, coronaviruses, lots of them.
And how does it actually spread most effectively? We always think sneezing, aerosols.
Aerosols play a role, sure. But the sources emphasize contaminated hands and surfaces fomites. Touching something contaminated, then touching your face. That's a major route.
So wash your hands.
Always good advice.
Yeah.
And because it's viral.
Antibiotics don't work. Supportive care only, rest fluids.
Exactly. Antibiotics only come into play if you get that secondary bacterial infection we talked about earlier, maybe a sinus infection or ear infection afterwards.
Okay, now for the flu. Influenza, types A, B, and C.
Right. Type A is the main one we worry about in humans. It's the most virulent, causes the big epidemics.
And its success comes down to those surface proteins, H and N.
Pretty much. There are glycoproteins on the surface. Hemagglutinin, the H, is like the key. It binds to receptors on our respiratory cells, letting the virus get inside.
Okay, H is for entry. What about N?
Neuraminidase, the N, is for exit. It's an enzyme that snips the connection, holding new virus particles to the infected cell surface, allowing them to be released and go infect more cells.
And the reason we need flu shots every year is because these H's and N's change.
Precisely. It's called antigenic drift. The flu virus has an RNA genome, and it's segmented, which allows for reassortment. Plus, crucially, the enzymes that copy its RNA are sloppy. They don't proofread well.
So mistakes happen constantly, mutations.
All the time. Little changes accumulate in the H and N genes, so the virus circulating this year might look slightly different to your immune system than last year's version.
Meaning last year's immunity might not fully protect you, hence the updated annual vaccine.
Exactly. It's a constant evolutionary race.
And we've seen more dramatic viral threats emerge too. SARS back in 2003.
Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome, yeah. Caused by a novel coronavirus then,
Yeah.
highly contagious, caused severe pneumonia, over 8,000 cases, nearly 800 deaths globally. A real wake-up call. And then MERS followed later.
We also have zoonotic viruses jumping from animals, like Hantavirus.
Right, Hantavirus Pulmonary Syndrome, HPS. Not common, but very deadly. You get it from infected rodents inhaling dust contaminated with their urine or droppings.
Scary. Does it spread person to person?
No, thankfully that's not reported. But the illness progresses rapidly, from flu-like symptoms to severe lung failure. Acute Respiratory Distress Syndrome, ARDS. Very dangerous.
Okay, so we've covered bacteria and viruses. That leaves our third category, fungal infections. These are often called deep mycoses.
Yeah, because they typically establish themselves deep, primarily in the lungs, after inhalation.
And some have this interesting feature, dimorphism.
Right. They can exist in two forms, often as a mold in the environment, say in soil, but then they switch to a yeast-like form inside the warmer temperature of the human body.
And that helps them spread.
That yeast phase is often better suited for getting into the bloodstream and disseminating to other parts of the body.
Let's look at a few examples. Histoplasmosis, where does that come from?
The fungus, Histoplasma capsulatum, loves soil enriched with bird or bat droppings. Guano, think caves, old chicken coops, areas with lots of roosting birds.
And how does it cause disease once inhaled?
It's clever. It actually targets and lives inside our alveolar macrophages, those immune cells in the lungs. It's an intracellular parasite. The symptoms can often mimic TB.
Okay. How about coccidioidomycosis, valley fever? That's tied to a specific region, right?
Very much so. Coccidioides immitis lives in desert soil, southwestern U.S., parts of Mexico, and central South America.
And how do people get exposed?
By inhaling spores called arthroconidia. These get kicked up into the air when the soil is disturbed. Think dust storms, earthquakes, construction, even archaeological digs.
Wow, environmental triggers. Lastly, what about Aspergillus? That sounds familiar.
It's a very common mold, Aspergillus BP, found everywhere, really. Decaying plants, hay, compost piles. Most people inhale spores daily with no issue.
But it can cause pulmonary aspergillosis in some people.
Yes, especially if they have underlying lung disease or weakened immunity. It can cause several different forms of illness. One distinctive form is an aspergilloma, or fungus ball. This is literally a tangled mass of fungal hyphae growing inside a pre-existing lung cavity, maybe left over from old TB or another condition.
A ball of fungus.
Yeah. Another important one is allergic bronchopulmonary aspergillosis, or ABPA. This is more of an allergic reaction to the fungus in the airways, common in people with asthma or cystic fibrosis.
Okay, so wrapping this all together, bacteria often needing specific treatments, sometimes secondary. Viruses, huge numbers, constant change, mostly supportive care. And fungi, often linked to specific environmental exposures.
That's a good summary. You see the different strategies.
Yeah.
Bacterial capsules, viral mutation, fungal environmental niches,
Mm-hmm.
and the body's defenses trying to cope with it all, starting with that vital ciliary escalator.
The key takeaways really highlight that complexity. Recognizing bacterial versus viral is critical for treatment decisions. Understanding resistance is vital, and considering environmental factors for those fungal infections. And thinking about that final provocative idea, we started with 10,000 microbes a day, but it's how these specific, sometimes rare environmental sources can suddenly become public health issues.
Exactly. Think about Q fever, caused by Coxiella burnetii, inhaled from contaminated dust around infected livestock like cattle, sheep, goats, or inhalation anthrax from Bacillus anthracis spores in soil.
It connects something seemingly mundane like barn dust or digging in the dirt directly to potentially severe disease.
It really underscores how interconnected our health is with the environment around us, even the microscopic environment. The air isn't empty. It's carrying potential threats, ancient and new.
Requires constant awareness, constant surveillance, a really important perspective for anyone in healthcare.
Couldn't agree more. It's been great diving into this.
Yeah, fascinating stuff. Thanks for walking us through it. And thank you for joining us on the Deep Dive.
We hope this helps you understand the complex world within our airways. See you next time.